The squeal of tires ripped through the empty street. Headlights swept across Ethan Cole's face, glistening with sweat and rain. His grip tightened around the frayed canvas bag in his hands like whatever was inside was the only thing keeping him alive. A black pickup roared past, slowed just enough for Ethan to feel the weight of eyes on him, then surged forward again, its engine growling into the darkness. Ethan pressed himself against the graffiti-stained brick wall, his heart pounding. In his ears, he'd been out of prison for less than 36 hours. No job, no place to stay. And now, someone was tailing him. Rain began to spit from the low clouds, cold needles against his skin. That's when another car, this one, a silver sedan, slowed beside him. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing a young woman in her mid-20s, her dark eyes steady under a wool beanie. "Get in," she said, urgent, commanding. Ethan hesitated, glancing toward the far end of the block, where the black pickup's lights were turning back. Toward him, he didn't have time to ask questions. He yanked open the door and slid into the passenger seat. The woman floored the gas. "Who are you? Why the hell are you helping me?" Ethan demanded, still clutching the bag. Without looking at him, she answered, "Because my father once told me if I ever met you, I should trust you. He said you saved his life." The whine of the table saw echoed off the concrete walls, blending with the steady hum of fluorescent lights. The air inside the Louisiana State Penitentiary's woodshop was thick with the smell of cedar dust and varnish, clinging to sweat-damp skin. Ethan Cole stood at his workstation, calloused hands guiding a plank of cedar across the blade with deliberate precision. The guard on duty, a big man named Weller, leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes half-lidded in boredom. Ethan didn't look at him. In here, avoiding unnecessary eye contact was as natural as breathing. It was a Monday afternoon, early spring, though there was no spring in this place. The air was always the same, either too hot or too cold, depending on the state's half-functioning heating and cooling. The windows, set high along the cinder block walls, let in thin shafts of light that caught motes of dust drifting in the air like lazy snow. Ethan had been here for 10 years. 10 years since the trial, since the gavel came down with the weight of inevitability, since the life he'd built outside had collapsed like rotted wood under a boot. The state called it aggravated assault with intent to kill. They made him sound like a monster. The truth, one no one seemed to care about, was simpler and uglier. Ethan had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A man in the bar, that night local real estate player, deep pockets, deeper connections, was about to stab another man. Ethan stepped in. He remembered the flash of the blade, the shout, the feel of the man's collar in his fist as he dragged him backward. In the chaos, the attacker went down hard and broke his jaw. Ethan barely had time to breathe before the police were there, and the whole thing turned against him. The man he'd tried to protect. He was gone before the trial even began, disappeared without a trace. No witness, no defense. Just Ethan and the prosecutor's story, and the jury bought it. So he'd been here ever since, counting years by the deepening creases on his face and the changing roster of men in the yard. He kept to himself. Prison taught him quickly that words were a currency to easily stolen and twisted. Silence was safer. He'd lasted by working woodshop in the mornings, laundry duty in the afternoons. The woodshop was better, quieter. The smell of sawdust and varnish was almost normal, like the life he'd had before, like his time in the Marines, before Iraq, before the night everything changed. That night had been more than a decade ago. in a place where the air was sand and gunpowder, where the horizon was nothing but heat, shimmer, and threat. He'd been on patrol with his unit when an IED took out the lead vehicle. Chaos, shouts in English and Arabic, gunfire tearing the air. Ethan had seen one of their ONPFC, Daniel Hayes, lying in the open, leg torn up, blood pooling in the dirt with, thinking Ethan ran, hauled the man up, threw him over his shoulder, and made for cover as rounds snapped past. They both lived, barely. Hayes was medevaced out within the hour. Ethan never saw him again. Sometimes he wondered if the man had made it. Sometimes he hoped not to know. Hope was dangerous in a place like this. The saw blade slowed to a stop. Ethan set the finished plank aside and wiped his hands on his faded jeans. Weller gave a low whistle. 3 days left. Cole, think the world's ready for you. Ethan glanced at him, expression unreadable. Doesn't matter if it is. Weller smirked. Fair enough. 3 days. That was all. 3 more wake-ups before the gates would open, and he'd be standing outside with a trash bag of belongings and $48 in gate money. Freedom. The word felt strange in his head, like it belonged to someone else during lunch break. Ethan sat at a corner table in the mess hall, his back to the wall. The din of conversation bounced off the high ceiling, low laughter, the scrape of plastic trays, the occasional clang of a dropped utensil. Across the room, he caught sight of Royce. Old man Royce had been here longer than anyone could remember. Grey stubble, sunken cheeks, eyes like worn river stones. He moved slow, but his mind was sharp as a blade. He didn't mix with gangs, didn't talk unless he had to. People left him alone. Today, Royce's gaze lingered on Ethan longer than usual. Then, as the guards called for the return to work detail, Royce shuffled toward him. You still leaving in 3? He asked, voice low. That's the plan, Ethan replied. Royce's eyes darted toward the guard station. Meet me in the infirmary after shift. Got a job for you. Ethan raised a brow. Not looking for trouble, Royce. Not trouble, the old man said. A favor, for someone who can't ask it themselves. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Ethan fixed a busted drawer in the infirmary storage cabinet, his hands moving automatically while his mind kept circling back to Royce. When he was done, Royce appeared in the doorway, glancing around before stepping inside. From his pocket, he pulled out a thick, weather-worn envelope, edges frayed, the flap sealed with yellowing tape. He pressed it into Ethan's hand. What's this? Ethan asked. Royce's eyes locked on his something that doesn't belong here. Something that needs to see daylight. I can't take it out. You can. Ethan weighed it in his palm. And if I say no? Royce gave a thin smile. You won't. You're not that kind of man. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. Finally, Ethan slid the envelope into his work bag. What's in it? Royce's voice dropped even lower. Proof of a bad thing done by a worse man. Don't open it unless you have to. And if you have to, be ready for the storm that follows. That night, lying on his narrow bunk, Ethan stared at the ceiling. The envelope sat under his pillow, its presence heavy and unnatural, like a live grenade with the pin already halfway out. 3 days. That's all. But already, something told him those 3 days wouldn't be quiet. Morning came on with the usual clangor doors slamming open in unison like metal thunder. Guards' boots thudding down the tier, a chorus of coughs and mutters as the block shook itself awake. Ethan sat up before the buzzer finished whining. He'd slept with one hand under the pillow, knuckles pressed to the sealed envelope like it was a relic or a weapon. It felt heavier than paper should. He slid it into his stay-tissue work bag, laced his boots, and stepped into the flow of men, shuffling toward breakfast. Prison moved like a river. Push when it pushed, bend when it bent. Keep your head above the surface and don't make waves. Ethan had learned to read the current. Today the water felt wrong. Not fast, not slow watchful. He clocked the first pair near the chow line. Two men he didn't recognize, posture loose but eyes fixed, not on his face but on the strap of his bag. They were wearing the kind of expressions that tried to be empty and didn't quite get there. Another man farther down the line turned the same way at the same time. Like he'd heard a whistle, Ethan couldn't. Ethan took his tray, grey eggs, limp toast, coffee that had been boiled into a mood. He sat back, left in the mess hall his usual corner, back to cinder block, eyes on exits. Royce was 2 tables over, eating with the deliberation of a man who didn't waste jaw work on things he didn't have to. Their eyes met for a breath. Royce dipped his gaze, not so much a nod, as a downbeat, message received, not here. After chow, the river splits some to laundry, some to yard, some the lucky few to programs. Ethan's detail headed toward the woodshop. Weller checked badges at the door, stamping each pass with a tired thunk. When Ethan's turn came, Weller's eyes lingered on the bag at Ethan's side. "What's in the sack, Cole?" he asked. Voice sanded smooth with years. "Lunch and pride," Ethan said. It was the kind of line that could read as humor or defiance. He pitched it for humor. Weller grunted, but his gaze dipped again. "Keep it tight today." "Wasn't planning to dance," Ethan said, stepping past. The shop welcomed him with sawdust and noise. He set to work sanding a chair back for the chapel cedar, curved like a shoulder. It should have been mindless, the good kind, breath in, breath out, with dust rising in small suns where the overhead lights cut through. But he could feel the envelope through layers of canvas. The way you feel a splinter you can't get out. Not agony, just awareness bright enough to turn every other sense down, mid-morning. A counselor stopped by to review his release plan, all paper assurances and brittle optimism, a voucher for a bus ticket, an address for a halfway house that might have a bed, a list of places that might offer day work if the foreman was short and the weather was right. You should consider the Veterans Center in Baton Rouge. The counselor added, as if should could bulldoze 10 years of absence. Ethan thanked him anyway. Manners cost nothing, and sometimes they bought quiet. When the bell rang for lunch, he drifted toward the infirmary on the pretext of tightening the cabinet hinges he'd fixed the day before. He waited in the hallway until the noise in the clinic dropped to a rustle and stepped inside. The nurse, on duty gains, sharp eyes, sharper tongue looked up, clocked him, then checked the clock on the wall like she hadn't. 2 minutes, she said. "Cabinet or out?" "Cabinet," Ethan said. Royce floated in as if he'd been dusted up by the fluorescent light. He closed the door behind him so quietly that the latch barely kissed the catch. Close up, his eyes were old, winter, cold, clear. "Frank, you see them?" Royce asked. "No hello, no fluff." "I see them. They're not from here." Royce's mouth made a shape like a smile, and then thought better of it. Out of block. No tattoos to stake a claim. No tells but the way they're trying not to have one. Who sent them? "If I knew that," Royce said, "I wouldn't be sending you." He tapped the bag with a knuckle. "You keep that sealed. You keep your feet moving. When you go out, don't go where they think you go. Where do they think I go? Exactly, Royce said. He paused, eyes cutting to the ceiling vent like it might have teeth. If I don't see you on the yard this afternoon, it's because I'm not on the yard. Ethan held his gaze. You disappearing, just not where hands can reach. Royce said, some storms you duck, some you stand in. This one you walk out of. Gaines coughed from the nurse's station, a sound like a warning. Royce slid back, ghosting out the side door. Ethan tightened the cabinet hinge until it wouldn't tighten anymore, and left. The yard was half sun, half shade, the chain-link fence drawing a hard line between nothing and everything. Men circled the track in ones and twos, looking like thinking. Basketball thudded at the far end. Laughter rose and fell in a way that could have turned thin in a second. Ethan made one slow loop. He didn't see Royce. He did see the pair from breakfast parked on a bench that wasn't their usual country if. They had won. They looked at him like men measuring a load. He gave them his profile and kept his lungs even. Back inside, the afternoon stretched like a cable under tension. Ethan finished the chapel chair. He oiled the grain until it glowed. He thought about Daniel Hayes' blood on sand, the weight of a body across his shoulders. The way gunfire stitched the air into a fabric you had to tear through to live. He thought about the real estate man, Victor Raines, all cufflinks and confidence, the night that turned and took his life with it. He thought about the envelope under the bag's flap and the quiet certainty in Royce's voice at shift change. Weller did something he never did. He walked Ethan to the threshold. For 5 steps, they were extra alone inside a crowd. Listen, Weller said, under breath. Some faces I don't know showed up in Seg yesterday. Paper says they're here for a transfer assist. Paper lies. Ethan's jaw didn't move. You got 2 more wake-ups, Weller said. Tie your shoes and don't trip. He swung the door open and barked at the next man like the moment hadn't happened. That night, the envelope slept under Ethan's chest. He woke twice to the sound of footsteps that weren't for him and once to the sound that was, a soft tread at his cell door. A pause, a presence like breath pressed a hand through the bars. He didn't reach for the call button. He didn't move at all. The footsteps went on. Day -2 was a copy with new ink. Where he walked, eyes followed. Where he sat, noise gathered and drained like tide. Royce did not appear in chow, not in yard, not outside the chapel where he sometimes sat like an unlit candle. The only proof that Royce existed was the envelope, and the way the air felt like it had been folded around a missing shape dot in the afternoon. A lieutenant named Clemens called Ethan down for a release briefing, which turned out to be a long table with pamphlets and a shorter man with a softer voice than his face. The world wants you to fail, the man said gently, like a doctor delivering a low prognosis. Your job is to make it wrong. What if the world works overtime? Ethan asked. Then you work nights, the man said, and smiled like a man who knew his metaphors were cheap and used them anyway because they were all he had. On the last night, sleep didn't come so much as settle. Ethan lay on his side with the bag between his knees. Every time a guard's flashlight passed, he watched the shadows cross the bars and counted to 20 after they were gone. At count 13, his pulse slowed. At count 19, it sped. Again, for no reason but memory. Dawn broke hard and plain. The sky outside the narrow slit of window was the flat white of old paper. They issued him a clear bag of belongings and the clothes he'd come in with, which didn't fit who he was anymore. Jeans a hair too loose, a shirt that remembered a different chest. He waited in a room with plastic chairs, a clock with a second hand that clicked like a small animal, and a door that looked like every door and none of them. A counselor, a different one, this time read his conditions without eye contact. Report to parole within 72 hours. No alcohol, no firearms, no contact with known felons. Submit to searches at will. Employment logs weekly. Curfew at the halfway house. Random tests. Violate any of the above and return to custody with prejudice. He signed where the sticky notes told him to sign. At the last desk, Weller stood with a manila folder and a neutrality that didn't quite hide concern. He slid a bus voucher across, then added, almost as an afterthought, a folded scrap of paper. "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Phone number," Weller said, "of a guy at the vet center who owes me one." Then, softer, "If you feel a tail before the gate, take the long route." "The long route to where?" "Exactly," Weller said, not winking. "Don't shake hands with anyone who offers you a ride, even if they smile." Ethan looked at him for a beat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm human on even-numbered days," Weller said, and then, quickly, "Go on. Don't make me write you up for loitering as your last act." The final door clicked. The air changed. A slab of sky opened. Outside smelled like damp dirt, exhaust, pine. There is a color to freedom, Ethan thought. Not bright, not loud, just a kind of unfiltered. He took one step, then another. The security checkpoint buzzed him out with an unceremonious beep. Beyond the gate, a narrow strip of asphalt stretched to the road where the bus would come or not come, and the world would be exactly as ready for him as Weller predicted. He walked to the edge of the lot and stopped. The chain-link fence behind him hummed its barbed hum. Across the road, a faded billboard pitched a lawyer with perfect teeth. He scanned the tree line without moving his head. The road was empty, except for sun and the long shadow of noon. The envelope sat flat in his bag. He felt it the way a man feels, a tucked-away blade, something that changes the math of a room by existing in it. He kept his breathing steady and his posture unconcerned. He'd learned a long time ago that fear was not the enemy brought. Fear was. A pickup truck rolled past a dull blue Ford with a cracked windshield and a ladder in the back. Not the black one. 2 minutes later, a white sedan came the other way, slowing just a fraction at the prison's driveway before continuing. Another 3 minutes, a black SUV with tinted windows, or just really dark glass. It didn't slow. No one leaned. No door opened. He waited, because waiting was sometimes surviving. Then the bus came. He climbed aboard with 2 other men who didn't look at him any more than he looked at them. He took a seat near the back, the bag on his lap, his shoulders angled so he could see the aisle and the side, mirror without turning. The bus lurched toward Baton Rouge. Fields gave way to a seam of suburbs, then to the city's crooked grin. People got on and off. A man with a canvas hat fell asleep with his mouth open. A woman in scrubs stared at her phone until her station, and then rose like someone whose feet were elsewhere. Twice he caught a glimpse in the window reflection. Not the glass ahead of a dark shape that might have been the same car for 3 exits in a row. Then it wasn't there. Then it was again. He didn't turn. He counted the telephone poles between glimpses. The number didn't prove anything but the kind of man he was now, the kind who counted. He stepped off near the halfway house on a street, with trees older than the sidewalks. The house itself was a Victorian with its charm muted by fresh rules. Nitrogen monoxide, visitors without permission. A sign taped to the door in all caps that had been printed by a man who loved clarity. The manager took his information and his voucher. Ethan gave him a nod and a yes where he wanted a yes, a no where he wanted that. He carried his bag down a hall that smelled like bleach and effort. The bed was a narrow rectangle with one thin blanket. The window looked onto the back of a grocery store, and the grocery store looked back. He sat on the mattress and pulled the envelope out. For a good long minute he just held it. He turned it over. The tape was yellow as old teeth. In the flap, Royce had written nothing, and somehow that felt like writing. Ethan slid it back in the bag. He didn't open it. He wasn't going to, not if he could help it. The plan was simple in outline and complicated in practice. Secure a copy, put the original in hands that couldn't be bought, and never again be a single point of failure. But plans, he knew, had a way of peeling apart when the wind rose. He went out at dusk because he had to. The halfway house had a kitchen but no food. He walked 3 blocks to a diner that promised coffee refills with a kind of weary pride. He ate a plate of eggs that tasted better than the ones that had tasted like nothing, drank coffee that tasted like a second chance, and watched the window as if it might offer a headline. On his way back, he saw it, parked to clean on a street. That wasn't the black pickup he'd clocked in different paint on different days. He didn't look twice. He walked on dot inside the house. The manager was watching a game with the sound off and the captions on. Ethan went to his room, shut the door softly, and stood in the dark until his eyes adjusted. A minute later, footsteps went past in the hallway. Not for him, not yet. He lay down, fully dressed, the bag as a pillow, the envelope under his skull. Sleep came late and left early. When he woke, the sky was the color of the side of a refrigerator. He showered, shaved the losses off his jawline, and put on the shirt that remembered someone else. He looked like a man who had been ironed and folded and set back on a shelf. It would do. He stepped onto the street. The day breathed cool. He had places he could pretend to be going. The vet center, the labor corner, the parole office to register, a second-hand store to buy a belt. He picked the one that made the most sense to Hope, the vet center. He cut 2 blocks east and 3 south and then doubled back 1 north, because long routes weren't about miles. They were about angles. Halfway down the next block, as he passed an alley where dumpsters breathed out the sour smell of old fruit, a car slowed beside him. Silver sedan, window down, a young woman under a beanie, eyes steady, voice firm. Get in. He didn't ask why. Not yet. He had learned to step into moments like this, careful, present, braced. The bag came in after him like a second self. As the sedan pulled away, he saw, in the side mirrors, small rectangle of truth. The black pickup's nose turned toward the light. Who are you? He asked, voice low. Clara, she said. Clara Hayes. A glance, a half breath. My father told me to trust you if I ever found you. He said you saved his life. Ethan didn't answer. The city slid past, wet streets shining under new light, and in his chest. A knot he'd tied tight for 10 years, tugged once, twice, as if testing. He tightened both hands around the strap of his bag and finally said, "Then let's not waste it." The silver sedan cut through the early afternoon traffic, weaving between box trucks and beat-up sedans with a confidence that told Ethan the woman behind the wheel had done this before. Her eyes stayed on the road, but he caught the way her hands shifted, left palm easing the wheel, right hand tapping the gear stick, ready for quick decisions. The city around them was wet from a morning shower. Puddles flashed silver in the sunlight breaking through ragged clouds. Steam rose from manhole covers. ghosting upward to meet the low-hanging haze. Ethan kept his bag between his boots, one hand hooked casually through the strap. It wasn't casual at all. He could feel the edges of the envelope inside. In the side mirror, the black pickup was gone. But gone didn't mean gone. "You haven't asked me where we're going," Clara said after a minute. "If you were taking me somewhere I shouldn't be, you wouldn't have slowed down in the first place." Ethan said, "So I'm letting you drive." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "That's oddly trusting. I've been in enough situations to know when I'm not the one holding the wheel," he said. She took a right, then another, down a narrower street lined with shotgun houses and cracked sidewalks. "My place isn't far. It's small, but secure." "Secure how?" "Second floor, rear entrance, 2 locks, 1 deadbolt, and my neighbor's a retired cop with bad knees but excellent eyesight." Ethan nodded. "That'll do." Her apartment was in a brick 2-story with faded green shutters and a wrought iron balcony. They parked in an alley behind the building. The rear stairs creaked under their combined weight, but the door swung open on a clean, well-kept spacer, living room with a bookshelf stuffed to capacity, a small kitchen beyond, and a hallway leading to what he assumed was a bedroom. Clara locked the door behind them, flipped the deadbolt, and set her bag down. "You can sit," she said, nodding toward the couch. "I'll get the letter." Ethan stayed standing until she returned from the bedroom with a small wooden box. She set it on the coffee table and opened it with care, as if the hinges might. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, yellowed at the edges. Clara took it out, smoothed it flat, and handed it to him. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then something's gone wrong. I told my daughter about you. I told her that if she ever met you, she should trust you. You saved my life once, and that kind of debt doesn't disappear. If she's with you now, help her if she asks. And if you're carrying something dangerous, protect it until it's in the right hands. There are men who'll kill to keep certain truths buried. I've seen them do it. You were a good Marine, Ethan. Don't forget that, no matter what they've said about you since." Daniel Hazelton read it twice, then set it down carefully. The handwriting brought back the Desert Haze's voice, low in the back of a Humvee, cracking jokes over the whine of the engine. The weight of him across Ethan's shoulders, blood soaking through the sand-colored uniform. "He was a good man," Ethan said finally. Clara's eyes softened. "He was my hero." He talked about you sometimes, but never much, just enough. Ethan nodded toward the bag at his feet. "What I've got, it's probably tied to the people who sent me away. An old-timer in prison passed it to me, said it needed daylight, said I'd know what to do with it. Do you? Not yet. But I know what happens if it ends up in the wrong hands." Clara leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time we find out exactly what's inside." He unzipped the bag and pulled the envelope free. The tape on the flap had gone brittle with age. He peeled it back carefully, then slid out the contents. A stack of photographs, several typed reports, and a bundle of handwritten statements bound together with a rubber band. The photographs came first grainy. Shots of a man in a suit meeting with others in a darkened restaurant. The suit was sharp, expensive. The face, even in shadow, was unmistakable to Ethan. Victor Raines, the same man who'd testified against him. The man who'd owned the bar where everything had gone wrong. The man who'd walked away untouched. The reports were police records, but not the official kind. These were internal memos, unsigned, with details about a murder 10 years ago. Dates, times, and most damning of all a note, indicating that Rains had ordered someone else to clean up the scene. That someone else had been the man Ethan supposedly assaulted. The statements were worse. First-hand accounts from people who claimed they'd been threatened or paid off to stay quiet. Names were redacted in some, but others weren't. One was signed by a man Ethan remembered from the night of the fight, someone the prosecution had claimed wasn't even there. Clara's brow furrowed as she read over his shoulder. This clears you. It's also a death sentence if the wrong person knows I have it, Ethan said. Clara tapped one of the reports. I know, a detective. She works organized crime, hates Rains. We could take it to her, could. Ethan said slowly. But if she's dirty or even if she's clean, but watch we hand her this and it disappears, and so do we. They sat in silence for a beat. Outside, a car passed slowly, the sound dragging against the quiet like a dull knife. It wasn't paranoid entirely when Ethan got up and went to the window. He shifted the curtain just enough to see. A silver sedan rolled by, not theirs. Behind it, a black SUV idled at the corner, engine running. Tinted windows. He let the curtain fall. We've got company. Clara was already moving. She opened a drawer under the TV stand and pulled out a cheap prepaid phone. I can call her, not from my cell. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. First we make copies, 2 sets. One we stash somewhere they won't look, the other we keep moving. Where do you hide something like this? Somewhere boring. People don't look for treasure in trash, they set to work. Clara's small. Print a word to life, spitting out grainy copies of each page. It was slow, and the sound felt too loud in the stillness of the apartment. Every few minutes, Ethan checked the window. By the time they were done, the light outside had shifted toward evening. They slipped one set into a manila folder, which Clara sealed and labeled Taxes 2017. The other went back into the envelope, which Ethan tucked under his jacket. That SUV's still there. She asked. Ethan peeked. Gone, which means it'll be back. Clara grabbed her coat. Then let's move. We can stash the decoy at my aunt's place. She's out of town and no one knows I have a key. They stepped into the hallway, moving fast but not rushed. Down the stairs, out the back, through the alley, and that's when the black pickup pulled up, blocking the mouth of the alley. 3 men got out, their jackets loose over shapes that didn't look like wallets. Ethan stepped in front of Clara without thinking. Rain began as a mist, a cool sheen settling over the cracked asphalt of the alley. By the time the 3 men closed the distance, it had sharpened into drops heavy enough to drum on the metal dumpster lids. The air smelled of wet cardboard, oil, and the faint, sour temps of beer from the nearby bar's trash. Ethan stepped forward, putting himself between Clara and the men. His weight settled into his heels, knees loose, a stance learned long before prison, back when situational awareness was the difference between living to see another sunrise and not. The tall one with the scar down his cheek stopped just outside. Arm's reach. The other 2 flanked him, one to the left with hands in his jacket pockets, the other to the right with the twitchy energy of someone used to getting his way through. Intimidation. Scarface smiled without warmth. You've got something that belongs to us. Ethan's voice was steady. I don't have anything that belongs to you. That's cute, the man on the left said, his tone oily. But you see, our boss doesn't like cute. He likes results. Clara's breath was slow behind him. He could almost hear her thinking, calculating. He knew she wasn't panicking. Wasn't her style. Her stillness was deliberate. Scarface took another step forward, boots splashing in a shallow puddle. Let's not make this hard, Cole. You hand it over, you walk away. You keep it, things get messy. Ethan let the silence stretch, the rain filling it. In situations like this, patience was a weapon. Let them talk, let them get comfortable. The man on the right shifted, revealing the bulge of a concealed pistol under his windbreaker. Not a threat yet, but a promise. What if I don't like your boss's idea of results? Ethan asked. Scarface's smile didn't waver. Then you won't have to worry about results at all, or breathing. Behind him, Clara moved just enough for her jacket pocket to shield the glow of the burner phone she'd slipped out. Her thumb dialed a number from memory one she hadn't used in months. The phone was old, no GPS, no saved contacts. She raised it to her ear, her voice a murmur masked by the rain. 3 in an alley off Dauphine. Black pickup blocking North End, armed now. She ended the call in under 7 seconds, the way her father had taught her when she was 16. And he'd started preparing her for situations she never thought she'd see. Ethan didn't look back. He could tell from the subtle shift in her stance that the call had gone through. Scarface's gaze slid past Ethan for a heartbeat, sizing Clara up, then returned. Your girlfriend there looks smart. Smart people don't stick with lost causes. She's not my girlfriend, Ethan said, and I'm not lost. That earned him a chuckle from the man on the left. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and fresh out of prison. That sounds lost to me. Ethan stepped half a pace closer, closing the gap so Scarface had to tilt his chin up just slightly to maintain eye contact. You're making one mistake, Scarface. Arched a brow, and that is, you think I'm afraid of you. The right-hand man's hand twitched toward his jacket. Ethan's eyes dropped to it and back up, slow enough to make the point. Rain pooled at the mouth of the alley. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed. Ethan's trained ear caught the Doppler shift, getting closer. Scarface must have heard it too, because his jaw tightened just enough to betray irritation. You called the cops? Scarface asked. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The man on the left swore under his breath, we should bounce. Scarface hesitated, weighing the satisfaction of pressing harder against the risk of blue lights. His decision was written in the way his shoulders turned before his feet did. This isn't over, Cole, he said, stepping back. Our boss wants what you've got. He always gets what he wants. Then he's in for a bad week, Ethan said. Scarface's smirk was thin as fishing line. We'll see. The 3 men retreated to the pickup, boots splashing through the rainwater. Doors slammed. The engine roared to life, tires hissing on wet asphalt as the truck reversed and disappeared into the traffic. A beat later, the siren grew into the Allian unmarked police sedan with its lights flashing low. The driver's door opened and a woman in plain clothes stepped out, badge visible on her belt. Clara exhaled in relief. Detective Holt, she called. The detective strode toward them, rain plastering her short, dark hair to her forehead. You couldn't have picked a better time to call, she said to Clara, before her eyes flicked to Ethan. And you must be the trouble she warned me about. Ethan stayed neutral. Depends on who you ask. Holt scanned the alley, noting the tire tracks and footprints. That was Raines's crew. I've been after him for years, but he's slippery. If they're this interested in you, you've got something they don't want in daylight. Ethan tapped the envelope under his jacket. You could say that. They didn't hand it over, not yet. Ethan didn't trust anyone he hadn't known long enough to watch them under pressure. Clara vouched for Holt, but trust was earned in layers. "We need somewhere safe to talk," Clara said. Holt nodded. "Not here. And not your place if they've been watching." Ethan shook his head. "If they followed us once, they can do it again. We need to move." Holt gestured toward her car. "I can take you to a safe house. It's off book, no paper trail." Clara hesitated. "If they're watching you, they're always watching me," Holt said dryly. "The difference is, I'm trained for it." They climbed into Holt's sedan, the interior warm and smelling faintly of coffee. As she pulled out of the alley, Ethan watched the mirrors. No black pickup, yet rain streaked the windows, turning the neon signs of passing shops into watercolor. Blurs. Holt drove with purpose, avoiding the main roads, cutting through side streets only a local cop would know. "You two have about 12 hours before they regroup," Holt said. "Rains doesn't like to lose face, and you just embarrassed him." Ethan's fingers drummed lightly on his knee. "Then we make those hours count." By the time they reached the safe house, a nondescript bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, the rain had tapered off to a drizzle. Holt led them inside, locking the door behind them. The living room was sparsely furnished, a couch, a coffee table, a single lamp. No personal touches, just a space meant to be temporary. Clara sat, pulling her coat tighter. "We need to decide. If we trust her," she said to Ethan quietly. "I know," he replied, "but for now we need the roof and the time." Holt dropped her keys on the table. "You've got both. Use them." The hours stretched. They spread the documents out again, Holt examining them with a practiced eye. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said. "But the second I put this into the system, word gets out, and then—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan understood. "We need copies out there, people who can't be bought." "I can help with that," Holt said, "but you'll have to trust me." The safe house was quiet in a way that didn't feel safe at all. Outside, the drizzle had thickened to a slow, steady rain that tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. The air inside was still, almost stale, and smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Holt had left 20 minutes ago to make some calls, locking the door behind her. Ethan didn't like it too much space for someone else to fill. Too many minutes for the wrong ears to find out where they were. Clara sat on the couch with her coat still on, a manila folder balanced on her knees. The soft glow from the lone lamp threw shadows across her face, catching in the sharp line of her jaw. She was flipping through the copied documents again, lips pressed thin. "You've read them twice," Ethan said. "3 times, she corrected, without looking up. "And every time I find something I didn't see before." He was sitting in the chair opposite her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Like what?" She pulled out a page and held it toward him, a typewritten memo with no signature, dated exactly 2 days before the night Ethan's life fell apart. "This note says Rains met with someone named Carver, a private investigator." The next day, Carver's name shows up in a police intake report. Guess whose name he was providing information about? "Mine," Ethan said flatly. "Exactly. It means they were setting you up before the fight even happened." Ethan leaned back, staring at the page. It wasn't news, not really, but seeing it in black and white made his jaw tighten. They worked for hours, spreading the documents across the coffee table. The photographs came for strains in meetings, Rains shaking hands with city officials, Rains standing beside cars with plates that traced back to shell companies. Then the statements. Ethan read each one carefully, recognizing faces in the grainy-eyed photos attached men he'd seen once in passing. Some he'd shared a drink with back before the bar became his prison sentence. One statement made his stomach turn. A bartender claimed he'd been paid to testify that Ethan had attacked without provocation. The payoff had come in cash, inside an envelope identical to the one Ethan had received from Royce. That means Royce, Clara started, was probably in the middle of this long before I met him, Ethan finished. He knew enough to know it could get him killed. Clara nodded slowly. And he still gave it to you. A car door slammed somewhere outside. Both of them froze. Ethan moved silently to the window, staying out of the line of sight as he eased the curtain aside. The street lamp on the corner flickered. A dark sedan was parked across the street, engine running. No visible movement inside, but he didn't need to see faces to know the type of people who sat in a running car in the rain. He let the curtain fall. We might not be as alone as we thought. Clara's hand went to her phone instinctively, then stopped. If we call Holt and she's not clean, she'll know exactly where to find us, Ethan finished. They sat in silence for a long minute. The rain and the low hum of the refrigerator, the only sounds. Then Ethan stood and went to the kitchen. He filled a glass of water, but his eyes weren't on the glass. They were scanning the narrow side yard visible from the kitchen window. Nothing moved. When he returned to the living room, Clara had the detective's business card out, running. Her thumb over the embossed lettering. You think she's legit? I think she's in the business of surviving, Ethan said. That makes her cautious. It also makes her dangerous if she decides we're a liability. You've survived worse people, maybe, but worse people didn't always wear badges. Clara tucked the card away. So what's the move? For now, we wait, and we keep our ears open. Waiting in a safe house was like waiting in a cell time. Didn't move, it just thickened. Every sound became something to pass. Every shadow a possible shape. An hour later, footsteps crunched on wet pavement outside. They were slow, deliberate. Not the hurried steps of someone trying to stay dry. These had weight. Ethan motioned for Clara to stay put. He moved to the front door, placing himself beside it rather than in front. The footsteps stopped. 3 slow knocks. Ethan didn't move. Clara's eyes were wide now, fixed on the door. The rain filled the silence again. Another knock. Louder, then. A voice. It's me. Open up. Holt. Ethan waited 3 seconds, then opened the door just enough to see her. She was breathing hard, her jacket wet through, hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes swept past him into the room before landing on Clara. We have to go, she said. What happened? Ethan asked. Someone leaked the address, Holt replied. I don't know who, but Raines's crew is less than 10 minutes out. If we're lucky, they think they're still ahead of us. But they won't be for long. Clara was already on her feet, grabbing the manila folder. Ethan slipped the original envelope inside his jacket. Where? He asked. Somewhere they won't follow, Holt said. At least, not right away. They were out the door in under a minute, moving fast but controlled. Holt's sedan was parked 2 houses down, its engine still warm. She unlocked it with a sharp beep, and they piled in. Ethan took the back seat, scanning the rearview mirror as Holt pulled away from the curb. The dark sedan across the street was still there, but this time, as they passed, its headlights flicked on. They've got us, Ethan said. Then we lose them, Holt replied. Accelerating, the streets blurred past. wet asphalt gleaming under street lamps, rain blurring the edges of buildings. Holt took turns fast, cutting down narrow side streets, doubling back twice. Still, in the rear view, the sedan was there. Clara glanced back. "They're not giving up. They won't," Ethan said. "Not until they have this." He patted the envelope inside his jacket. Holt's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to the road. "Then we make it somewhere they can't reach without making noise." "And where's that?" Ethan asked. Holt's lips curved in a grim half-smile. "You'll see." The rain made the city blur into streaks of light and shadow as Holt's sedan cut through the wet streets. Clara sat in the front passenger seat, both hands gripping her coat around her like armor, her eyes locked forward. Ethan stayed in the back, angled so he could watch the mirrors without looking like he was watching them. The dark sedan behind them had dropped back a block, but he'd seen this before. They were letting Holt think she was losing them, keeping just close enough to follow without crowding. "You're sure this place is clean?" Ethan asked. Holt's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "As clean as anything gets in this city. No cameras, no paper trail, no neighbors within shouting distance." "I've used it before. What for?" Ethan pressed. Her mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Interviews. The kind you don't want in a precinct." The city thinned out quickly, storefronts giving way to warehouses, loading docks, and chain-link fences topped with rusting coils of barbed wire. The air smelled of diesel and wet asphalt. Street lamps here were sparse, casting islands of amber light in a sea of dark. Holt slowed, then swung the sedan into a side street, stopping at a gate chained shut. She killed the headlights and rolled down her window, reaching out to unlock the chain with a small key. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You keep a key to this place?" "Like I said," Holt replied, pushing the gate open enough to drive through. "I've used it before." They rolled inside. Holt closed the gate behind them, leaving it chained loosely enough to pull shut fast if needed. The sedan crunched over gravel until it came to a stop beside a hulking, corrugated metal building with no signage. "This is it," Holt said. The warehouse was cold, the kind of cold that came from years of emptiness. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as they crossed the open space toward a small office built into the far corner. The office had one desk, 2 chairs, and a battered metal filing cabinet. Ethan set the envelope down on the desk, its presence drawing all 3 of their eyes like it was something alive. Clara pulled the manila folder from her bag, adding the copied pages to the pile. "We need to decide tonight who gets this, and how." Holt closed the office door, leaning against it. "The safest way is to split it. Different people, different places. If Rains gets one set, the others still survive." Ethan shook his head. "If we scatter it too soon, we lose control. And if one copy disappears, we might not even know who took it." Clara spread out the photos and reports on the desk. "We're out of time to debate. We can't just sit here hoping the right move shows up." They began working the problem. Like a puzzle, Holt suggested sending a copy anonymously to a reporter she trusted, someone who'd been chasing corruption stories for years. Ethan countered that the reporter might be watched and the leak could be traced back to them. Clara suggested giving a set to a judge in another jurisdiction, someone too far out of Rains's pocket to be bought. Every option had a risk. Every name came with a shadow. "Then maybe we do it all at once," Ethan said finally. 1, 2. The reporter, 1 to the judge, 1 to someone Rains doesn't even know is in the game. That way, if he moves on one, the others are already moving too. Holt nodded slowly. It's dangerous, but it could work if we move fast. Outside, a low rumble broke the stillness. Ethan froze, head tilting. It wasn't the wind. He moved to the office window and peered through a gap in the blinds. Headlights washed across the gravel lot. One car, then another, rolling up to the gate. The chains rattled, then dropped. "They're here," Ethan said, voice low. Holt crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing her bag. "We've got 2, maybe 3 minutes before they're inside." Clara swept the documents back into the envelope, shoving it into Ethan's hands. "Move." They stepped out of the office into the warehouse's vast, dim interior. Shadows stretched long across the floor, broken only by the faint glow of streetlight leaking through the high, dusty windows. The sound of boots hitting gravel was getting closer. "Rear exit?" Ethan asked. "Far side, behind the pallets," Holt said. "Already moving." They threaded between stacks of wooden pallets and crates, their footsteps muffled by the layers of dust. Somewhere behind them, the warehouse door groaned open. Voices carried inside low, sharp, too far away to make out words but close enough to quicken their pace. Clara risked a glance back. Therein, Ethan's eyes scanned for movement ahead. "Go left." They slipped through a narrow passage between 2 stacks of crates, emerging near a heavy steel door at the back of the building. Holt shoved it open, the rusted hinges squealing in protest. Outside was an unlit loading area with a single truck ramp and a view of the fence line. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and heavy, the kind that held sound close. As they crossed to the fence, a voice barked behind them, "Stop." Ethan didn't stop. He grabbed Clara's arm and hauled her forward. Holt swung around, drawing the pistol she'd had concealed under her jacket. She fired once, the shot cracking through the night, ricocheting off metal. Shouts erupted. Footsteps pounded closer. "Go," Holt yelled. Ethan and Clara reached the fence first. It was topped with barbed wire, but a stack of empty pallets leaned against one section. Ethan climbed, ignoring the sting as the wire snagged his sleeve, and dropped down on the other side. Clara followed, moving fast despite the tear in her coat. Holt was last, firing another shot before climbing over. The moment her boots hit the ground, they were running. They cut across a strip of open ground toward a narrow side street. The sound of engines roared behind them. Their pursuers had split up, some on foot, some circling with vehicles. Ethan spotted a gap between 2 leaning sheds and motioned them through. They emerged into a dimly lit alley that spat them out onto a wider road. A lone taxi idled at the corner, its driver leaning out the window smoking a cigarette. Ethan didn't. Aski just opened the back door and pushed Clara inside, sliding in after her. Holt dove in on the other side. "Drive," Ethan told the driver. The man blinked. "Where to?" "Anywhere, not here," Holt snapped. The taxi pulled away just as 2 dark SUVs turned onto the street behind them. The driver glanced in the mirror, his cigarette dropping into his lap. Those guys following you?" "Not for long," Holt said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a folded bill and tossed it into the front seat. "Lose them, and there's another one of those." The driver's eyes widened, and he pressed harder on the gas. They zigzagged through back streets until the SUVs were gone. Then did Ethan let himself breathe. Clara still clutched the envelope like it was fused to her hands. Holt leaned back against the seat, exhaling. "We can't keep running like this," Clara said. Ethan met her eyes. "No. Next move, we put this in motion." All of it, at once. Holt nodded, agreed. But we'll need help, and not the kind that wears badges.